Hello and welcome. I hope you all had a happy and healthy new year. Today's webinar is on the Rising Sophomore Housing Lottery that will be taking place during the spring semester. We do have a quick agenda that we'll be going through today, and we'll be opening it up for questions at the end. Just a quick introduction. My name is Charles Souza, and I am the Senior Associate Director of Housing Operations here at Fairfield University. I've been in this position for about the last 10 years, working with the housing lottery process and helping guide students through the process to make it as painless as possible. Today we'll kind of go over and we'll look. We do have two main housing options for our sophomore students. One of the presentations that you've already heard earlier in the webinar series is about the residential college option. Today I'm going to touch on some of the housing options for that, as well as the non-residential college options for our sophomore students. About 500 of our students will go into the sophomore housing options, and the other 600 students will go into the non-res college option. So the slide you're seeing today, right now, is showing our non-res college sophomore housing options. If you look at it, we have three suite-style buildings. Here at Fairfield, we just define a suite-style housing option as a room that has a bathroom option in it. So our first two options, Casca and Claver Hall, those are two traditional rooms conjoined by a bathroom. So it's a suite for 4 students. And in Faber Hall, there's two different options within Faber. There is a 2-room suite option with an adjoining bathroom. And then there is a single suite option in Faber, which is one large room that 4 students live in and share that bathroom within the suite. Those 3 housing options are available on the south side of campus. Some of your students may refer to this as the Village. The Village historically was a smaller area, but as the university has grown, it's actually become its own area, which the Office of Residence Life refers to as the south side of campus. Those options, Casca, Claver, and Faber, they're all co-ed by suite. So it's a single-gendered suite with 4 students living in it. But the suite next door or across the hall could be of the opposite gender of the students that are living in the suite. Because they have their own bathrooms, we can kind of mix it up, whereas in a traditional hall, it's single-gendered by the bathroom on the floor because they are communal bathrooms. The fourth option, this will be the second year we've been doing this, is in Dolan and Meditz halls. These are apartment-style buildings. It's limited availability for these. We're limiting them to the 8-person apartments. It is a full apartment within the building. So in addition to having their own private bathroom, they will also have access to their own kitchen and living room area within the apartment. The biggest difference between this option and the suite style option, besides the numbers available, would be the cost. This year, the cost to live in a traditional suite style building, such as Casca, Claver, or Faber, is $7,575, which includes a meal plan. And in Dolan and Meditz Hall, it's $6,310, which does not include a meal plan with it. Students who do select this option for housing do have the ability to add a meal plan, which would be at an additional cost, which is separate. So depending on the meal plan that they do choose, would depend on how much the housing and meal plan would cost. We do have some commuter meal plans, which are semester-based meal plans, where it would be you get X number of meals per semester, and each time you use a meal, it declines from that balance, whereas the traditional halls and the suites have 14 meals a week and $100 dining dollars as the option, the minimum option that the students have to take. As I mentioned, you guys may have already seen the Res College option. Our residential college housing options are Creative Life, which is in Loyola Hall. It's going to be on the third floor. This year, some of your students may be living in Loyola on the first and second floor. We're planning on keeping the same model for next year, whereas our Creative Life Residential College will be solely on the third floor. That will be a co-ed floor by wing. Our Ignatian Leadership Residential College will be in 42 Langeth Road. That is suite style housing. We have 4 and 8 person suites within that building. Those are single gendered suites, co-ed floors. And lastly, we have our Social Justice Residential College, known as Service for Justice, which is housed in 70 McCormick Road. It's a traditional style hall with double rooms and a communal bathroom on each floor. I just want to note with these, all 3 of these buildings are on the residential quad. So the students, all of our first year students do live on the quad this year. These are sophomore buildings that are on the quad. So if they like living on the quad, this may be a great option for them. Now, when looking at the housing lottery as a whole, each class year, it doesn't matter if you're a rising sophomore, junior, or senior, the process is all similar. Here at Fairfield, we use a random-based lottery system where each student is assigned their own individual random lottery number. For our sophomores, they would pair up into groups of either 2 for our traditional halls, so through the Res College, in Loyola 70 McCormick. For our suites, groups of 4, or and in Langeth and Meditz and Dolan Hall, we do have 8-person options. They would be in groups of 8. They would create their own lottery groups. They would have the opportunity to request and approve the roommates that they want to live with each member requesting the other members that they like in the group and approving one another to make a complete group. Once the group is completed, the lowest lottery number in the group, which would be the best number, would be the number that represents the group that allows them to know in which order they'll be selecting their housing in. I just always like to note that students are responsible for ensuring that they do have a complete group to go into the lottery process. So they do need to confirm with their roommates that they have each requested and approved one another to do it. Once all the groups are submitted during the time frame, students will be given their lottery selection time, and I'll go over the specific dates for that. But the lowest number group does go first. So they'll start with the first time, and then it'll kind of move through the process as they go through and select housing until all housing is exhausted. The lottery selection times, like I said, are based on their group lottery number. And I always like to note with this that it's not always sequential because students are assigned numbers prior to them selecting their groups. So you might have a group that has multiple low numbers within the group, necessitating something to switch. So it might go group lottery number 1 selects, group lottery number 2 selects, and then the next lowest number in there might be group number 5. So that group lottery number isn't necessarily the full thing. It's more about the group selection time with the students. As I mentioned, we do have the 2 separate processes that kind of go with this. They run concurrently. We have the non-residential college option. Again, students who are applying for the non-residential college option would apply in either groups of 4 for the suite style housing or groups of 8 for the apartment style housing. Their room selection would be on April 3rd. Students who elect to go through the residential college option They do need to go through the application process and be accepted into the residential college. Um, Students have until February 3rd to apply to that. Um, and they'll be getting their acceptance letters in mid-February, prior to any of our housing lottery processes opening. And then students would have the option, based on their residential college, to, if they're selected into one of our traditional style halls, so either Loyola or McCormick as a group of two. And if they're selected into Ignatian Leadership, which is in 42 Langeth, they would select as either a group of 4 or a group of 8. Their selection process also happens on April 3rd. On the next slide, I'm just going to give a few more details about the residential college process, just so people are aware. The residential college applications are now available at www.fairfield.edu/rescolleges. The deadline to apply for those, again, is February 3rd. We'll be sending out acceptance letters. Sorry, it says mid-March. It should be mid-February. What's accepted into the residential colleges, all students are notified at the same time. They can start their process of selecting their roommates. The roommate selection process for them opens on March 23rd. That's when they're selecting and submitting their roommate requests. It closes on March 27th at 4 p.m. No late requests will be accepted after that because the process shuts down at that point, so we can go through and review all the groups and start assigning group lottery numbers. On March 31st, we'll be posting the group lottery numbers as well as the pick times. And then room selection starts on April 3rd at 9 a.m. And again, upcoming deadlines, both processes happen concurrently. So we are running them at the same time. Some key things to know is that the sophomore housing lottery applications are open on February 10th at 9 a.m. What the housing lottery application is just basically them having the opportunity to go in and re-sign their housing agreement with Fairfield University, updating their housing lifestyle preferences, as well as updating any emergency contact information that needs to be updated. Students need to complete the housing application in order to move on in the process. Students can complete this at any point after February 10th, all the way through the conclusion of the process, but they will not be available for roommate selection until they've completed the housing application. Most students tend to do the housing application and roommate selection at the same time. I do like to note students do get nervous when they are going through because they can't find the people that they'd like to live with. Those people are not available to be searched for until their housing application is complete. So I generally recommend that our students start the process early and just fill out the housing application so that when it comes time for roommate selection, they can jump right in the process and start going through and selecting and approving their roommates so that if there are any issues, we can help them, so that we're not running up against a deadline and people are coming in the Office of Residence Life on the 27th with issues and we're trying to help resolve the issues and students aren't available to go in and accept requests or make requests at that time because they're in class. So we always have them ask that they do that early. Again, for both non-res college and res college, on March 31st, we will be posting their pick times starting at 4 p.m. And then room selection is on April 3rd starting at 9 a.m. All right, so at this point, that concludes my part of the presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to Marissa to answer any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Charlie. So we do have a couple questions coming in already. As a reminder, if you have any additional questions you would like Charlie to answer live, please feel free to enter them into the comment section of YouTube. So the first question is, do students who have approved medical accommodations for housing go through the same process, or is there a special process for them?
So each year, students do need to update their medical accommodations paperwork. That information will be going out to the students um, in the housing lottery booklet, as well as the students who are currently approved for medical accommodations will be receiving information from Residence Life and the Office of Accessibility. Really, it depends on what the student's medical accommodation is, depends on how their process looks, because each medical accommodation is a little bit different. So, for example, if a student is approved for a single room due to their medical conditions, I, as well as the rest of the Office of Residence Life and Office of Accessibility, will work directly with the students to secure housing, as we do have single rooms available on campus for these students. If it's something more general, such as student has been approved for air conditioning, they would go through the process just like any other student. Um, all of our sophomore buildings except for Loyola Hall will have do have air conditioning in them. So that shouldn't be a hindrance to them applying. Um, if a student does go through the Res College process, they are accepted into Loyola Hall and they do have air conditioning approval. Um, Similar to this year, if they live in a building without air conditioning, they can bring that freestanding self-evaporating unit with them, and we'll have it installed for them. So they will have air conditioning in their room similar to what they had this year. And everything in between, myself and the Office of Accessibility do keep clear lines of communication with these students and sharing that information to make sure that they are getting their accommodated housing.
Great, thank you. We have a question asking if you could just review how a group is created. So what the process is for that?
It's kind of a multi-step process. It is fairly simple. It sounds very complicated when we explain it. But over the years, I think I've kind of nailed it down to make it a little bit easier. So for this example, I'm going to use a 4-person suite because it makes it very simple that way. So all 4 students have completed their housing application. We're going to call them students A, B, C, and D. So what'll happen is when the roommate selection process opens, student A will go into the roommate selection portal and select roommates B, C, and D. Roommates B, C, and D will get an email generated to them saying that roommate A has requested them to be roommates. Roommate B will be the first person to sign in and say, I accept A as my roommate, as well as put out a request for roommates C and D. Roommate C will log in and accept A and B's request and request D as a roommate. Roommate D has the easiest job where they will go in and log in and see the information and say, okay, I've been requested by roommates A, B, and C and accept those requests. Now that group is fully matched, so roommates A, B, C, and D are one complete group.
Great, thank you. So we do have a question about the res college process versus the non-res college process. So you talked about how students who want to live in a residential college apply for the apply through the application, then they find out, and then they select their housing. But do all roommates in a group have to be accepted to the same residential college for them to live in a particular building?
Yeah, so for students who are applying to the residential college, we have designated buildings for the residential college. So each residential college is in its own building. So if a student is accepted into Service for Justice Residential College, their roommate would also need to have been accepted into the Service for Justice Residential College in order for them to be matched as roommates to select that housing.
Great, thank you. Is there a process for students who don't have an ideal roommate already if they're going into the housing lottery individually?
So part of that process does come through the housing application process. Like I said, it's students updating their housing preference application, so they can update their, smoking, sleep habits, study habits, all that stuff. Very similar to their first year housing application. They can update that information. So if they're looking for a roommate and they're not really sure where to go, they do have the ability through our housing software, which is the housing director. We refer to it as THD. So through THD, they do have the ability to go in and search for people with similar lifestyle preferences as them, as well as the Office of Residence Life does have roommate finder nights in the individual buildings. So all of our first year area coordinators and graduate resident coordinators will host at least one roommate finder night for their building. That does not mean that only students from their building are able to attend that. Students from any building that are looking for roommates in that specific class year do have the ability to go out and, pair up with people that have similar lifestyle preferences, have conversations with them, and pair up that way. And we also do an online roommate finder where students do have the ability to go in and fill out information, because it's not always just one individual person looking for a roommate. As I mentioned, you need to have complete groups in order to select housing. So you may have groups of 3 people that would like to live in one of our suite style housing options that is looking for a 4th roommate. So they're going to put in a roommate finder request. It's all online, so students do have the ability to just go in and see who's looking for roommates and have the opportunity to connect with them, have those conversations, and see if they're going to be a good roommate match that way.
Great, thanks. Could you just clarify for us how a student would know if they're a residential college student or non-residential college student when they're going through the process?
So if a student has been accepted to the residential college, it's because they've applied. They would have received a letter letting them know that they've been accepted into the residential college process. And on the back end, as I said, we run our processes concurrently. So when students do go in and they do go to select roommates and through the process, we've actually have it set up so that if a student has been accepted into a specific residential college, they can only search for roommates that have been accepted into that same residential college. So they can't, go in and look if they're accepted into Ignatian Leadership, go and just pull somebody that's in a regular non-residential college person saying, oh, well, you're my friend, I want you to live in 42 Langouth with us. That person would need to be accepted into the Ignatian Leadership Program in order to be eligible to be selected as a res college roommate. Same thing on the flip side is non-res college students can't go in and select res college students to come and join their group in the non-res college process to live in either the suites or an apartment in Meditz or Dolan.
So you mentioned that all rising sophomores essentially go through the selection process on April 3rd. Will all sophomores have housing at the end of that day, or will some be placed later?
Historically, we do have a number of students that aren't able to select housing at the end of the process. It's really based on numbers of housing available to those students and where that housing is. So if students are going in and they're looking to select suite style housing, and we have about 120 available suites, and I have 130 groups, there are 10 groups that aren't going to be able to select suite style housing, which basically means that there is housing available in other places. It just may not be that housing that they were looking to get into. So there is the potential that we would have space in our residential colleges, as well as we may have spaces available in our apartments in Medicine and Dolan for sophomores. But we do have housing available for them. We do work to get as many of those students housed prior to leaving for the end of the academic year. In some instances, we do place students in housing over the summer. Students that aren't able to select housing but have gone through our housing lottery process are placed on a wait list. So as housing becomes available for those students, if it is their top choice, we will place them in that available housing. But prior to August, all students will be placed into class year appropriate housing and will be notified before their return in August, letting them know where they'll be living and who they'll be living with.
Wonderful. So all this information has been super helpful. When are students going to hear about this information? Where can they find it? Where can they find the housing application and everything?
All of the housing lottery information will be going out at the beginning of February. At the latest, if we can get it out earlier, we will. We're just finalizing some details with some of our upperclassmen housing. But they will be getting all this information. It is all sent out through the housing director, so they will receive that. We'll also have information posted on our fairfield.edu website, as well as Life at Fairfield. And we will be sending out directed information in conjunction with the area coordinators and providing information at floor meetings with the area coordinators and the RAs.
Great. So one more question just came in. Can you explain the difference between the February 3rd deadline for the sophomore residential college applications and the February 10th deadline for the sophomore housing lottery application?
So the February 3rd deadline date is for students who are interested in applying and living in one of our sophomore residential colleges. That application is due to be reviewed and accepted into the residential colleges. The February 10th date is the opening of the housing application. That housing application is for all rising sophomores, juniors, and seniors. That's something that every residential student will need to fill out, whereas the February 3rd date is the final date that a student can submit their residential college application.
Wonderful. So I think that's all the questions for now. As a reminder, if anybody has any additional questions, you can always email residentslife@fairfield.edu. If you have any questions about residential colleges, specifically, you can email rescolleges@fairfield.edu. Both of those email addresses are on the screen right now. And feel free, as always, to reach out to the Office of Student Engagement at engagement@fairfield.edu. Thanks for a great day.